All right, it's story time with Benny, and this is a problem. This is a big, big problem. DC Comics is f***ing with me, I think. I can't say f*** or this early in the video. Dan's got to censor it. We're screwed. All right, you read the title properly. My problem with DC is effing with me. I legit think they are. And this is going to be a story time from San Diego Comic-Con. San Diego. I don't know why. Whenever I say San Diego, I feel like you gotta say San Diego. Gotta say it like that, with a carnival barkers kind of San Diego Comic-Con. I didn't even say comic. I said comic. Anyway, I'm already off the rails. Hey everyone, today's episode is brought to you by Shortboxed. Click the link down below to join a giveaway and get your hands on a graded comic book, or use their app to get your hands on more graded comic books. It's also brought to you by me over at Comicstorian. If you want to see my adventures of going through One Piece for the first time ever, check out that channel. All links are down below. Let's get back to it. I'm so distraught, weirded out. I don't know. Okay, I don't know. DC, I think, is messing with me, or more in line, I believe that Jim Lee of DC is messing with me, and this all may be in my head or whatever. Let me go back to the beginning of the story. So San Diego Comic-Con was created in, too early. Okay. San Diego Comic-Con is a yearly event that actually happens where people get together and they talk about comic books. It's world famous. You probably know what it is. As per usual for this job, Sal and I from Comic Pop and the Absolutely Podcast series go to San Diego Comic-Con. Now, traditionally, when we go to these things, we'll book a bunch of events, we'll book a bunch of things, we'll have interviews, discussions, and a lot of ideas and stuff that never comes to fruition. It's kind of like the big perk of being Comicstorian. I get to go to these things and can kind of like talk to a lot of people that I would never get to talk to. Well, one of those people on this particular trip was Sean Gordon Murphy. Now, you may know him from the White Knight fame and stuff like that. And he's got a lot of cool projects coming down the pipeline that he wanted to talk to me about. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about those yet, but you'll see a lot of announcements when it actually gets announced that he's doing it. Now, in the middle of all of this, there are a series of parties. Every night, there's like 2 to 4 different parties. Sal and I hate parties, especially the kinds of parties that happen at this thing. It's a lot of really loud music, and it's basically a bunch of people getting really, really drunk and just being dumb, basically. And I've never been a fan of those kinds of parties. It might be because by the time that, I had the freedom to do that was after the military. So I was already 29 and I was already kind of like over the idea of going to these loud parties where I just got drunk. So traditionally, we kind of turn down a lot of those parties, or we show up early for the networking purpose of talking to various people and having a good time. And then when the music starts getting louder, we take off. But there's one particular party that I'll admit we've never been invited to. DC every year hosts this very private get-together. You gotta basically be like super on the in of DC to be able to get into this party. Now, it's never been something I've strived to get into or worked towards. DC, I've always worked with very closely until more recently when they had a lot of problems, but they've sent me books to cover. We've had direct contact with a lot of them. You see a lot of their interviews coming up here in Comicstorian. But, at the end of the day, I'm still a YouTuber. I'm not a DC marketer or a DC writer or a DC artist or any of that stuff. So I don't get invited to like these DC events, and I'm okay with that. But Sean Gordon Murphy does. By the way, fun side note, if you ever meet him, don't call him Sean Gordon Murphy. He finds that very weird. He only signs Sean Gordon Murphy because Sean Murphy was already taken. As a matter of fact, one time, I'm going to segue our story to a funnier little story. My brother Andy, who writes a lot of our scripts, and our producer Dan got to meet Sean Gordon Murphy at one of these kinds of parties. And they proceeded to talk to Sean Gordon Murphy for 10 minutes, in which they were drunk enough to repeatedly call him Sean Gordon Murphy. To which his response was, "Guys, you're freaking me out. Can you just call me Sean?" Both of them found that hilarious, and I don't think they remember that story to this day, but I tell that story every chance I get because it's hilarious. Anyway, Sean invites me into the DC party. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to go to the party. We can have our meeting there. Why don't we meet up there? I'll get you into the party and we can meet at the bar." Cool. The DC party has open bar, so you can get whatever you want. It's a great place to take your meetings, I'll tell you that. And so we go into it. Sean and I have a great meeting. We have a great discussion. We start BSing about various comic books and stuff like that. And then he's like, "Hey, let me introduce you to some of the people that maybe you haven't met." In walks Jim Lee. Now, if you don't know who Jim Lee is, this guy is like god tier legendary in the comic book industry. Artist, writer. He's now, I believe, in charge of like 99% of DC. Like, this is the guy, okay? And I've never actually gotten a chance to meet Jim Lee. I've met many, many writers and gotten to hang out with a lot of them, but I've never met Jim Lee. Now, Jim Lee's off talking to another individual. This individual is the artist for Batman Damned. So Sean's like, do you want to meet Jim Lee? And I told him, I was like, I should be good to talk to Jim Lee. I very rarely fanboy over the people I meet. As a matter of fact, funny other side note, I've met like movie stars, Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, Mark Ruffalo, and I don't get weirded out by that. What weirdly enough does weird me out is when I meet my favorite comic book writers, or the most infamous one when I met Hideo Kojima of Metal Gear Solid fame and couldn't talk to him. Now that one may have been more because he had a translator, but either way, I get weirded out about like this other tier of people, but I can hold my own no problem when I go to these stupid red carpet events. Yeah, I said stupid, just go with it. So anyway, Sean's like, are you gonna fanboy? And I'm like, no, I won't fanboy. I kind of fanboyed. I kind of. And this is where I think DC was messing with me, or more accurately, Jim Lee was messing with me, but I might not be, okay? I didn't think about it during the time. So he brings me over to talk to Jim Lee. Jim Lee is talking to the artist for Batman Damned, Lee Bermejo. I think that's how you pronounce it. I might be wrong. I apologize if I got it wrong. They're having a nice conversation. Sean comes over and he introduces me. Now, I've been doing this for 12 years. It is very rare for someone to not have at least heard of me. Not everyone watches YouTube and watches my videos, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But it's very rare for especially someone in the comic book industry to have never even heard of Comicstorian. But it does happen. I'm not like so full of myself that I'm like, funky cigar. Yes, you've all heard of me. You guys don't, when you think you're all rich and like famous, you don't do cigars? No? Okay. Anyway, he introduces me. Why can't I say that? He introduces me to Jim Lee. Now, he's like, this is Benny. He runs the Comicstorian channel. They have almost 3 million subscribers. They do promotion for DC comic books and stuff like that on YouTube. And Jim Lee's like, oh, nice to meet you. I've never heard of you. Now I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, like I've said, I've met many people who have not heard of me in the comic book industry. So this wasn't out of the ordinary. So he's like, so what exactly do you do? And I'm like, well, we basically take your comic books and we create audio dramas of them from previous issues to lead into the next issue so that people know what they can add to your collection. He's like, wait, so you just narrate the comics? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like Audible for your comic books. And we just kind of pump them out pretty regularly. And, you know, and a lot of you, we've been working with you guys for like the last 12 years. And he's like, really? Okay. And he thinks about this for a moment and he looks at me. So you act out the characters? And I'm like, well, yeah, I have a voice for all the characters. What's your Batman voice? Now, if you've ever met me in person, I can't pull out the voices quickly. It's not an easy task for me because I have to like think about it. I have to be in the mood. A lot of times when I'm doing these videos, I have to put on some music in the background that gets me in the right like headspace, mystery, horror, action, and that's how I can get to the voices. Now I'm in a very loud party holding my rum and Coke because Sean and I were having rum and Diet Cokes, just go with it. And I'm sitting here trying to remember how to do my Batman voice in front of Jim Lee, one of my idols in the world of comic books, okay? And he's like, what's your Batman voice? I'm like, well, you know, you got to kind of do like a gruffer voice, kind of like a Christian Bale, you know, you're just going to be like, oh, I'm Batman. And of course, it was a terrible version of it because I'm trying to do it on the fly with alcohol in my system. But I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm Batman and I got my batarangs and I, you know, do the Batman stuff. And he's like, oh, okay, that's fascinating. It's fascinating. What do you do for like Wonder Woman? And I'm like, well, normally you just kind of do a much higher pitch overall because, you know, I can't really do a female voice, but I can do a much higher pitch, higher tone, and this is kind of how I handle the women. So now I'm in the mindset. I'm doing it. And he goes, okay. So what's your narrator voice? And I'm like, oh, that's just me. That's just my voice. And Jim Lee's like, seems to be interested. Now, once again, I'm like, this is perfectly fine. I'm used to people not knowing who I am, especially when they're really high up in the companies. They don't really, they don't follow YouTube. They don't care what you say on Twitter or YouTube or any of that stuff, and they don't follow any of that. So it makes sense. So we're talking and we're having this discussion, And I'm keeping my cool. I'm just, okay, I'm talking to Jim Lee. I'm talking to Jim Lee. And he's asking me about my channel and my voices. This is so weird. This is so bizarre, but okay. And he's like, I forget how he segued, but he decided to introduce me to Lee Bermejo, the artist for Batman Damned. And the conversation shifted to talk about Batman Damned and the artwork. I think it was something along the lines of, how do you handle stuff like the situation we had with Batman Damned? Now, he was seemingly giving Lee an issue, like he was just giving him a hard time. If you're unaware, Batman Damned is the penis episode or issue. That's the issue where Batman's penis was on display. That's the one that you've seen in the shorts, I've mentioned multiple times, and we just did a video on it. Now, I was at this party Friday night. Friday morning, Dan and I released the video, The Problem with Batman's Penis. Okay, weird coincidence, but okay. Got it. So then we proceed to talk about how do I navigate putting Batman's penis on YouTube, which then segues into the discussion where basically giving Lee a hard time for drawing it in there. He then reiterates his quote that I quoted in the video about how they originally came out, it was much darker pages, they lightened them up at the last second, and in his words, Lee had a little surprise for us on the page. Now, I'm not thinking too much of this, and I'm not sure where to go with this. You guys know that I have a tendency to interrupt people on podcasts, which I think I've gotten better with, but I do have that tendency. In the way conversations flow, I kind of do that sometimes as well. I was keeping my mouth shut talking to Jim Lee. This is Jim goddamn Lee. I'm not going to be making an ass out of myself. And I didn't think anything of this. So I have this discussion with Jim Lee and Lee Bermejo about Batman's penis and the Batman Damned thing. And in my head, I'm just like, this is so weird. Jim Lee is talking to me about a topic I just covered this very morning in which I quoted him, and he's using that exact same quote right now. Now, at this point, Scott Snyder had showed up at the party. I had a meeting with Scott Snyder at the time, and Sal did as well. Sal was having problems getting into the party because, as I said, it's super exclusive and I needed a favor to get in. Scott wanted to get into the party, so we were like, let's go talk to Scott. Let's get Sal into the party and stuff like that. So I had to leave Jim Lee and Lee. You know, they were having their fun. They were goofing off. Sean had already left at this point, so it's just me. I go talk to Scott. I go talk to Sal. And we're having a great time, having a great discussion. Stuff's going good. Weird side note about that. He's talking about some old stuff with Dan DiDio. And I swear he said Dan DiDio's name 3 times. 3 times exactly in that discussion. Because on the 3rd time, he turns and he goes, "Speak of the devil." And there's Dan DiDio coming over from behind. And I literally looked at Scott and I'm like, did you summon him? Did you say his name 3 times and summon him here? If you don't know, Dan DiDio is the guy who was like in charge of all of DC up until about 2020. So it was a series of weird events. So anyway, I go to this. Jim Lee's obviously busy. I don't know Jim Lee personally. I'm not going to go butt my way into Jim Lee's next conversation or his next meeting. And what happens is I go about my night. Sal and I had a meeting with somebody else. We got some drinks with somebody else. And the next day, I run into Sean again. And I tell him this weird story. Like, he's like, "So what happened with Jim Lee?" I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, when you left, we just started talking about Batman's penis and how it was drawn into the comic. And he was basically quoting the video that I made that very morning. And he just looks at me and he's like, "Oh, no, Jim must have been trolling you." I'm like, "Wait, what?" He goes, "Yeah, Jim is like super tapped into like, online and what's going on." And I'm like, "Yeah, he did have a Twitch channel. I was subscribed to his Twitch channel. He knows about YouTube and Twitch." "Oh, yeah. No, he must have been trolling you. He was trolling you." So now I have been debating for 4 or 5 days, did I just get trolled by DC, aka Jim Lee himself? Did he troll me to my... What do you guys think? This is the story as it has unfolded. So let me know in the comments, based on this story, did I just get trolled by DC, aka Jim Lee? And Jim Lee, if you're watching this, please tweet and confirm nor deny. I don't know. Seriously though, that was the craziest thing ever. And the problem with DC trolling Benny is I have been all out of whack for 5 days trying to overanalyze this situation. Like, you guys are like, oh, you tricked me with a problem. No, the problem is real. I haven't recorded anything in days. I don't know what to do. I don't think I can ever do Batman again. Oh, Jim Lee or this one. I got to do this version of Batman. I don't know. Is that Moraski the Grouch? I don't really, see? That's the problem with DC trolling Benny. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to check out our sponsors, Shortboxed, and go check out our Comicstorian channel. I'll be back next week with a regular problem with video. I've got a few that I'm kind of concocting. Batman, Joker, or we could do something cooler like Daredevil, which will get no views because I got an interesting take on Daredevil since Chip Zdarsky's ending his run. But let me know in the comments down below what you want and if you think that Jim was trolling me, or do you think Jim didn't know? Like I said, it's not out of the ordinary for someone to not know who I am, but it was so weird. Thank you guys. I'll see you next time.